Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Mindful Constitution podcast. I'm psyched to be chatting with Hadley Sorensen today, who is a mother of three boys, which is quite impressive. She is also a runner and recently published author of a book we're going to talk all about today, which is the Dirty Truth on Social Drinking. I just read recently. Very good, very good. How are you today, Hadley?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to get into your book. There were so many pieces of it that resonated with me, and I especially love how your message is that you do not need to hit rock bottom before exploring your relationship with alcohol. And I think this is a much needed paradigm shift in the landscape of alcohol and drinking. So, yeah, I'm psyched to dig in. But I guess the first question I really wanted to start with, just to open up and uh, kick things off, is that one main thing you said is really kind of in one of your main goals is to redefine normal drinking and the culture around it. And so I'm curious, like, what aspects of your drinking looked normal on the outside, but were actually, providing you or kind of giving you a really hard time internally?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was someone who went right from the college binge drinking scene to the mommy wine culture scene, right? I got married fairly young out of college. I had a stepson who was 5 at the time that we got married. So it was like this, I went from like the college scene, early 20s, right into being married with a young kid. And while my drinking certainly wouldn't have looked normal, right? I use quotations because what really is a normal relationship with alcohol, that's a whole nother issue. Might not look normal to everyone, but if you are in the sort of drinking scene, the way I drank was very normal, right?
Mm,
It was, and by normal I mean it fit the sort of social conventions around me. It didn't stand out. I was certainly not the worst drinker I knew. There were plenty of people who were worse than me. I mean, obviously these words are all problematic that I'm using, but I'm just trying to
right.
kind of set the stage.
Yeah, totally. I totally get what you mean by that too, is like your depends on the environment you're in. It's
Right.
on
So
perspective.
the norm in the college where I was with the crowd that I was with was heavy binge drinking on the weekends, party life. You wake up, you're hungover, you start drinking, you do it again if it's Saturday. Didn't necessarily drink every day, but I was always sort of that binge drinker. And when I did binge on the weekends, I didn't have an off button, right? And I was a blackout drinker. I tended to black out, which is so scary and problematic on so many levels. And I just ignored that red flag for so long. But that was just kind of college life, right?
Mm.
And then in my early 20s, out of college, it changed a little bit. But it was, work the corporate life all week and then go out to the bars on maybe Thursday night, but definitely Friday night and Saturday night and binge drink then and then kind of suffer through your hangovers and go back to work on Monday. And then that sort of morphed into the mommy wine culture, which I really embraced once I had my two younger kids. That idea, like, oh, two under two, it's so hard. I need a drink. Mommy needs wine. The tea towels, the dish towels that say, you know, boxed wine is just a juice box for mom and all of that icky stuff. And that was the norm in my little suburban oasis. I didn't fit the stereotype of what we think of when we think of somebody with a problem. I
Mhm.
wasn't drinking every day. I wasn't drinking in the morning. I wasn't hiding it in my closet. I didn't have the proverbial brown paper bag, that I was sipping from. I maybe had a glass of wine with dinner during the week. And then I binged on the weekend at social events. And I didn't stand out at all.
Mhm.
That was the norm. And that's really disturbing now that I step back from this new vantage point and think about it because none of that is normal. Nothing about binge drinking is normal, and nothing about, you know, blacking out, suffering through hangovers. I mean, all the things that we kind of laughed about in that bar scene or the winery scene. Once I graduated to mommy wine culture, I live in Virginia wine country, and so that's a
Mhm.
big thing. Everybody goes to wineries, and um nothing about that should be normal. And I want to help redefine that because it's not healthy, it's not safe. There's just so many problems with it.
Mhm.
And I ignored that for so long. I think so many of us do.
Yeah. It's such a it's such a weird it's such a weird kind of inner conflict. I'm sure you can relate to and talk about in the book a lot is like having that inner questioning when everything external is like it's fine. You're fine. And everyone is doing the same thing you are. It's really such a practice of leaning into our intuition and
Yes.
kind of starting to trust ourselves more. And I think for me, I don't know if you feel the same way. I'm sure you do, but after really learning, like, okay, this might be normal in the world, but like, this isn't going to help me be my happiest self. And then recognizing like how much I can trust my intuition in contexts outside of alcohol consumption and leaning into it elsewhere as well. And really kind of gaining that level of self-trust is super powerful, I think. And
Yeah. Yeah, I really relate to that. I mean, I ignored my intuition for so long and it kept trying. Like it was screaming at me by the end, right?
Mhm.
It doesn't matter if everyone around you is drinking this way. It doesn't feel good to you. I had so much shame and regret and self-loathing tied to, my blackouts and each
Mm.
drinking episode. And nothing about it felt good. And honestly, from the very first time I drank as a young teenager, sadly, something about it didn't feel right. I felt like I was experiencing alcohol differently than everyone around me. Like everyone would just sort of like laugh it off the next day and move on. And I was like stewing in shame and regret. And I just it always felt sort of toxic or off or not right. And I ignored that for decades because I thought, oh, maybe that's just part of the human condition. We have to drink, right? We have to.
Mhm.
So you just have to kind of push through it.
Yeah. Yeah, would you say you identify as being like highly sensitive or empathic or
I
um
do.
yeah. I
Yeah.
feel like, that's one thing too that's so important when we talk about like our experiences of alcohol too, is like maybe some people are experiencing heavy drinking so much differently than other people, and that's okay, but honoring it and being like, this is really making seems like I'm drinking like everyone else, but I'm not having the same
Yeah,
response.
well, I think that's a great point. I also think it's a combination of things, right? Maybe I was experiencing it a little bit differently, but since, I flipped the script and of talking about it from the other side, I now realize that so many of the people that I thought had it all together and they were just fine were feeling the same way I was. We just are so conditioned to keep that inside and not talk about it. And so that's the other thing, that's why we're out here doing this. We want to normalize having these conversations and speaking up if it doesn't feel right, because I think so many people are trapped in that place, especially in that gray area where we think, well, I'm not that bad.
Yeah.
So what are my options, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that actually brings up a good point I wanted to ask you about, because you said that you were in your day-to-day environment and social circle was all kind of people drinking similarly to you. And so when you did start talking about your path and journey, do you feel that there was other people within that same circle that were like, okay, good, you feel this way? Or was it more just kind of peripheral people?
Honestly, the people closest to me, there was some like head nodding and yeah, I get what you're talking about. I feel that way too, um but everyone kind of closest to me, that while they were very supportive, I didn't change their minds. They all still drink,
Hmm.
right? My husband still drink. I mean, he's a very different drinker than I was. It's not an issue. But it was more people on the, periphery who were speaking up and saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're saying this. I feel the same way." Now,
Hmm.
as time has gone by, it's been almost 3 years, there have been people a little bit closer to me who have slowly started saying, I think maybe I'm experiencing some of the same stuff. Um, but interestingly, my closest friends and family, they all still drink. So that's been,
Yeah.
interesting to navigate too.
Yeah, it is. I ask because it is funny sometimes how it seems like the immediate circle maybe notices, but does seem like sometimes even with entrepreneurship or changes in general, like it seems like a lot of times strangers on the internet that are the most supportive in a lot of ways, but
Yes. And
it's
it's
funny.
almost easier to talk to the strangers on the internet about it
Yeah.
too.
Because you're like, I'm not judging you. You're not like triggered because of our dynamic or past together. It's just like
Y-
a clean slate. And I think
Yeah,
sometimes people don't, it's almost like people get more triggered because they are close to you and you're showing to them that change is possible. Like you live the exact same life and you're choosing to change. And so that's, I think, more triggering for people closest, whereas strangers on the internet are just seeing your story as like one of inspiration and they have no
I
past.
totally agree. And with the people closest to you, there's this interesting dynamic of, well, I don't want them to think that I'm trying to push this choice or this lifestyle on them. And they're probably wondering, wait, is she judging me for my drink? So it's a little bit of a tightrope kind of navigating
Hmm.
that in the beginning. And I think I'm sort of past that stage now where we all kind of, we just accept each other. In fact, I was just at a wedding on Friday for one of my very closest friends with my best group of girlfriends. And they all drank, and we were just joking about it. They were
Yeah.
saying, well, you'll get a lot of content out of this because we'll all be drinking, and this is your first sober wedding. And, I was joking about documenting them like National Geographic style. Yeah, so it's
Drunk
now it's
women
very
in the wild.
right, right. Look at the drunks in their natural habitat. But because we're close friends and they've been so supportive, like we can joke like that and have those conversations. But early
Yeah.
on, it was kind of like, how do I
Oh,
approach
yeah.
this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think most people go through some level of that. Just it's hard to break out of people's expectations of you and what they've been historically, and adjusting to that dynamic takes time, and I think a lot of relationships can grow and traverse those fluctuations, ebbs and flows, but not all of them do, and sometimes that's okay too.
I
Um,
agree.
so yeah, I know a big catalyst for your kind of sobriety was the pandemic and
Hmm.
kind of going through part of that. And how do you think, I know this is such a familiar story for so many people, is just the kind of overconsumption during the pandemic and how it escalated for a lot of people. It's definitely the same story for me. I started drinking more before I was like, okay, this is not working. A
Yeah.
lot more before none at all. So how did the pandemic impact your drinking?
Well, so it's really interesting because right before the pandemic, December 1st of 2019, I talk about it a lot on Instagram and in the book. I threw this huge surprise party for my husband's
The
big
80s party?
birthday. Yeah, it was an 80s party. And it was like so many of those nights go, right? I had promised myself that I was going to be good. I wasn't going to black out. I was going to remember every moment. And it was an awesome party, but in fact, I did black out and I ended up with one of the worst hangovers of my life. I mean, it was awful. I think I probably should have gone to the hospital. I probably had alcohol poisoning, or I don't know. It was horrendous. And so the next week was, not only was I recovering like physically from this hangover, but I slipped into a depressive episode that was very clearly tied to the drinking. And it was the first time I kind of connected those dots, right, between my mental health and my drinking. And so I took a break, right? It was one of those I'm never drinking again moments. So I didn't drink at all that December. And everybody was like, dude, dry January. I can't believe you're doing dry December. That's nuts. And I was like, can't go anywhere near it, right? And I hardly drank. I think I had a glass of wine on New Year's Eve then, and I had a few drinks here and there throughout January, February, and I felt very proud of myself for being all moderate. And look, I finally cracked the code. I've figured it out. And then the pandemic hit, and I still was doing, really well. And then things slowly kind of started to spiral. It was like, oh, my kids are going to be home for good. What is that going to look like? And then my husband got diagnosed with cancer, and then my grandfather died. And then it was like one crazy thing after another. We were almost laughing, like, what else could possibly happen to us this year? And my husband got laid off the week before he started chemo. I mean, it was nuts. And so I kind of threw up my hands and said, like, this is crazy. Obviously, I'm going to need to drink to get through this.
Yeah.
You froze. I wasn't sure if you're still there. Okay.
You froze too, but it's still recording. The
You could still
talking
hear.
still going.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, so I threw my hands up and said, obviously, there's no other way to survive this besides drinking. So at first it wasn't extreme by any means, but it was more consistent than I had ever been. Like 5 o'clock each day, I would like race to open a bottle of wine and pour a glass, and I would watch the news, which was not good for my mental health either at that
Yeah.
point. And I was just kind of, I just felt like I was sort of coming undone. And of course, there was the attitude as we were navigating cancer treatment, where we had to be really careful about keeping ourselves really quarantined. But I had two young kids at that point, and so we're trying to figure out childcare during daily radiation and all of this. And friends had started a meal train and were bringing dinner every night during treatment, and people would bring a bottle of wine, and everybody was doing that, like, geez, I don't know how you're handling this. I'd be an alcoholic by now, right? Those really classy jokes that we like to make. Um, and it was like, yeah, I mean, clearly I'm drinking a lot. That's how I'm getting through it. And so it just became more consistent, and it felt like an excuse. I felt like I had every reason in the world to justify this drinking. And um, so it just became consistent, and I consistently felt crummy in the mornings, even after a glass or two of wine. I just never felt 100%. And as we shifted into 2021, we started having friends back at our lake house again. And that's when then the sort of weekend binge drinking kind of picked back up. So now I was drinking consistently during the week and binging on the weekend. And that's what ultimately kind of led me to the point where I drew the line in the sand and realized that I had to make a change, because it had escalated to the point that I felt like I was on the cusp of things getting much worse, if that makes sense. I felt like I
Mhm.
was at a tipping point, and I could either dive off that cliff or I could stop myself before I got there.
Yeah. And the mindset you described too is so common where we think, oh, we earned this, we deserve it. And how ironic that we think that way about going through hardship and then treating ourselves with something that is going to make it likely harder. And we're probably not processing it to our fullest capability, nor are we like, providing ourselves with real stress management or anything. So it's just so wild to me how like thought patterns become a just thing, whereas they don't even make sense when you really dissect them, but it's just culturally a norm and a thought pattern or belief system that sticks because it's convenient. And then when you really think about it, you're like, how many of these ridiculous belief systems have I been like making my life decisions on?
Yeah, I mean, if you even look back to like the internet during that time, during 2020, and the sort of message behind the memes and the posts, and everybody was justifying, that mindset, like we are going through something really hard collectively. The best way to handle that is to drink. It was everything from like the Zoom happy hours that people were doing to jokes about, well, it's okay to start drinking in the morning because we don't have to go anywhere. And I mean, it was just,
Yeah.
it was sort of like a collective shift towards, yes,
Alcoholism.
we need alcohol to survive this.
Yeah, and reinforced by the fact that it was an essential business while,
Right.
everything else is closed, but the liquor stores are open. And I think that's telling of our societal priorities as well.
Right. Yeah. Oh, and all the restaurants, the change to the regulations so you could order margaritas takeout from the Mexican restaurant when everybody
Yeah.
was getting takeout. And I mean, just crazy, crazy
Yeah,
how we shifted to make it such a priority.
it is really wild too when you think of the larger context as this health scare collectively that is needing us to be in our most resilient states of health, yet we're making every allowance to get you delivery alcohol, drive-through alcohol. The liquor stores are open. Don't worry, drink this poison, but like, don't get sick.
But stay really healthy.
But
Yeah,
stay
stay
really
really
healthy.
healthy.
Yeah. So it is wild. There's so many of those like aha moments where you kind of I start examining your programming and conditioning around alcohol, but then realizing like it really does open the door to exploring your subconscious belief systems overall and getting curious about how many things have I been telling myself and absorbing beliefs as facts, and it's been impacting the way that I live my life and I haven't even realized it. So it's so apparent with alcohol, though. And I wanted to talk about in one point of the book, you were saying something which I highly relate to, where you're kind of on to the next and feeling this sense of urgency around achievement and the next milestone and what your next accomplishment is and kind of being go, go, go. And so I'm wondering how you feel like that aspect of your personality impacted your drinking patterns, if at all, or if you think there's any correlation.
Well, so I think that kind of component of my personality materialized early with this desire to, like, I always wanted to be older. I wanted to be more mature. I wanted to hit that next sort of milestone. Um, I was never like comfortable where I was. I was always sort of, and when I was young, it was this real desire to be older. I don't know. I was an only child. I was really independent. Um, I was also a huge introvert, right? So that played a role too. But I think when I first drank, it was this desire to be older. It was that idea that like drinking makes you kind of a grown up.
Hmm.
Um, and I liked that that really appealed to me. And so I think that was a function. Um, I don't know how much that kind of part of me played into my drinking for the rest of for the rest of my life, except that I used it to sort of soothe myself along the way because, if you're somebody who is always like that overachieving kind of type A, want to hit this next milestone, want to get to that next stage, that comes with lots of bumps in the road. And it's not always like a straight trajectory. So I found myself obviously using alcohol to kind of soothe or alleviate the stress that went along with that. I think the part of me that drove my drinking more was the introverted side, right? Where I was using alcohol really to make myself into someone that I wasn't. I thought it made me, more outgoing, more exciting, more fun. It allowed me to be social when most of the time I just really don't want to be social. And I finally accepted that and embraced it since I quit drinking. But I fought that for a long time. And so I did a lot of stuff I didn't really want to do, um, using alcohol to get through it. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I'm pretty sure almost anyone who drinks, whether it's problematically or not, understands that sentiment of like, I don't really know if I could hang out with those people without drinking, or like I don't really know if that would be very fun for me without drinking. And I was really similar to you where I always identified with being super outgoing and whatnot. But when I think back to how I was as a child before I ever started drinking, I was actually pretty shy and introverted. I liked to read a lot and time to myself. And when I started drinking, it made me think I was more outgoing than I was. And I definitely feel nowadays, I'm like half of the circumstances and situations I put myself in, I wouldn't enjoy now. And I'm sure it's a product of like also getting older, but it was just
Yeah.
so too like thinking I'm supposed to enjoy these circumstances. But if it requires alcohol, then perhaps that's something to look at.
Right, maybe it's not that fun if you have to drink in order to do it. Yeah, I relate to that. I was, and I was 14 the first time I drank, and I was always felt, I was shy, I was socially awkward. I felt like I sort of struggled to fit in, and alcohol kind of smoothed out those rough edges and made me think, "Oh, I can do this." Um, but in fact, I didn't really want to do it. And so that's been one of the cool parts. And again, I think it's this function of age as well as I'm getting older, but kind of embracing my introversion and kind of learning to appreciate that piece of myself in sobriety has been great. And I'm very cut and dry about, what I want to do and what I don't want to do these days. And I'm very comfortable with that.
Yeah, it's really refreshing to be happy just to spend time alone too. And once you're comfortable in your own skin and spending time alone, then there's really nothing that you're gonna I don't have FOMO anymore. So it's like
Yes.
I'm not gonna just do something because I have a fear of missing out when I enjoy my own company just fine. And that's been really nice too, where it's like I only do things I'm genuinely interested in or with people I genuinely want to spend time with, not just feeling like I'm missing out on some social event or some experience that otherwise I wouldn't really have a desire to partake in. But
Yeah. Well, and you hit the nail on the head when you said, because now you feel comfortable in your own skin. I think that was a big part of it. And you talked earlier too about trusting yourself. And that has been a huge, huge bonus for me is learning to trust myself, letting go of that shame, really feeling comfortable in my own skin. Those have all been huge benefits that, like you said, I no longer feel FOMO. I'm perfectly content to do what I wanna do, even if that's sitting home with my book when people are out doing something. I don't, I can spend quality time with you later if I want to. I don't wanna be out doing whatever, it's been refreshing.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And to the thing, what you were talking about with type A personality and kind of feeling like really driven, I recognize for me with that part of my personality that I didn't really know how to like rest and rejuvenate really. Like I feel like I didn't have an off switch and I also didn't know where to channel my energy because I hadn't really found my path yet. And so I I saw a lot of drinking to kind of just shut down that sort of drive and energy and like check out from it because I A didn't know where to put it and B didn't really have healthy coping mechanisms to help me decompress. So it was like an off switch. Um, which yeah, it's interesting the different ways we can use alcohol, but yeah, I one thing that I really liked that you were talking about too was the interesting dynamic of wellness culture and
Oh, yeah.
about alcohol, because I think this is a really interesting topic because you hear everything in moderation, like all the time. Um, and how we apply it to alcohol, sometimes I see it as like a little bit of an enabling of a toxic culture. And so tell me like your thoughts on, I know you talked about it in the book too, but your thoughts on alcohol within wellness culture and also this idea of like you've been talking about redefining normal. So what would normal be? It's two questions in one. You can start with wellness.
Yeah. So I feel like I can talk about this topic from a unique perspective because I was a health and fitness coach who sort of built my whole platform on social media, like my whole little persona was I am this marathon running fitness mom who loves her wine. And you can still enjoy the things you love and be fit and healthy and it makes me cringe now, right? It's such an oxymoron. And people will scream at me about this, and it's fine. I'm willing to listen to the screaming, but I firmly believe that alcohol does not belong in the same conversation with wellness, right? Everything in moderation applies to chocolate and potato chips and you know, whatever food or whatever, but it doesn't apply to a toxic, poisonous, addictive drug,
Mm-hmm.
right? It would be like and people don't want to accept this because there is still that lingering perception of like, but red wine's good for your heart. People say that on my posts all the time. But everything in moderation or red wine's good for you. It has antioxidants. Ugh. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the prevailing science now shows that no amount of alcohol is safe or healthy. It causes 7 types of cancer, like directly leads to them. It's a group 1 carcinogen. All of these things we now know. But that information isn't shared on the internet quite as, enthusiastically by middle-aged moms who are drinking wine, right? They're going to share the post about how it's like eating a bowl of blueberries or it's good for your heart or that kind of thing. But the truth is it's not good for us. It has zero redeeming qualities. It is not like eating sugar. That's what people will always say. Well, it's just like sugar or everything causes cancer these days. No, everything is not a group 1 carcinogen, right? Alcohol is in the same category with cigarettes and formaldehyde and all it's very different. Um, but we do everyone a disservice when people like me, like I used to, are out there preaching about how you can drink and still be healthy. Are there examples of people who are really fit or really ripped or really healthy and they still drink moderately? Yeah, of course there are. I'm not saying it's not possible, but perpetuating the idea that alcohol can be part of a healthy lifestyle, I think does a disservice to all of us. And when people are out there sharing that message, and talking about alcohol in the context of health and wellness, or you've got like the, beer yoga or the yoga and wine events. And as a runner, I can tell you how
Oh,
intimately,
yeah, beer. I just did a half
oh,
marathon at for my local like brewery and just like, I do it because I like doing half marathons
yeah.
local, but it's beer at the end. And it is interesting though, because I feel like I see people's point sometimes and they're like, well, I like literally have a drink here and there and I don't think of it. Like, what do you feel like for the people who really do have like a couple drinks a month or something and they get a lot of joy? Like, how do you feel about that versus just to be like, because I agree with everything you're saying too. I feel the same way where I'm like, what is the point? How, and I don't think it should be included in the conversations about wellness. I feel like it really enables a lot of people and holds people back on their health and weight loss path. And I saw this constantly working as a health and wellness coach for like a corporation where can see your logs. I see there's like 3 glasses of wine every night, but
Right.
people don't want to talk about that or acknowledge that this is like affecting your hormones, this is affecting your sleep, this is affecting your gut health, your brain health, your metabolism. Literally, your liver function is completely put on hold for anything besides processing alcohol. And it's like hindering you in every part of your health and wellness path. But then like I was reading comments on somebody's post the other day who was talking about alcohol as the biggest scam type of thing. And it was a doctor. And so many people, and I'm sure you get this all the time, are like, well, like, just have your glass of wine and move on with your life. Or, like, alcohol's been around for centuries and it brings people together. Or there's like a
Right.
joy associated with drinking in moderation that's like different than the, physical toxicity of it. So what do you say to that, like, kind of nuanced conversation around like really drinking in a limited fashion and with like positive intention and all that
Yeah. So
jazz?
it's tricky. So like I'll use my husband as an example. He's like the person you described. He might have a drink once a week. But if he does, great. If he doesn't, he's not thinking about it.
Mm,
He's like, I call him the moderation unicorn, right? So he's
mm,
great to use as a comparison. Fine. Like, do I wish he didn't drink at all? Yeah, just for convenience sake or whatever. But but it doesn't matter. And even though it might not sound this way sometimes, I'm not on a mission to like ban alcohol from the earth. I don't think that everybody needs to stop drinking.
mm.
But the distinction in this whole wellness conversation is if you're going to drink and you can do so in a way that you believe is moderate and you feel good about it, fine, but let's stop
But
talking about it. Let's stop glamorizing it. Let's stop kind of perpetuating the idea publicly that drinking is normal and expected, right? Like the ads and the way it's like I talk in the book about a runner who I always admire who ended up, becoming the
I saw,
face of
yeah.
a beer brand. Um, and it was like a big joke, like, coming back from a run and she's got this fridge full of
Was it Mickle?
beers.
I
Yeah, it
feel
was
like they all
yeah.
are.
Yeah, so Mick Ultra had this big push that year, like the New York Marathon, they did this so well. They had this whole group of women, they got these influencers to like draw the logo on their arms and Sharpies and run under the banner of Mick Ultra. And they did it under the guise of like it was like an ad campaign around like fostering inclusion in the sport. So it
Oh,
was like, "Oh, we all feel really good about this. Let's support it." But you're perpetuating the idea that drinking is part of a healthy lifestyle as a runner. So that's what I am against,
yeah.
right? It's
I
like the same with the mommy wine culture. Like, let's stop talking about it that way. Let's stop pretending that it's healthy and pushing it on people and acting like it's this big funny joke. Um,
When a lot of people are in reality silently struggling, and I feel
yeah,
very similarly to you in terms of obviously it feels probably to like an outside person that we're like preaching abstinence to everyone, but my message is very similar. It's like if you drink alcohol and you feel happy and fulfilled with your life, then that's great. But I think
rock
there's like
on.
a lot,
Then my
yeah.
message isn't for you. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly. And like it's not for you. And if you have any inkling of questioning around your relationship with alcohol, or you feel like you're not quite where you want to be, this might be something to explore because culturally we're conditioned to not until it's like well beyond a problem and escalated to physical dependency and alcoholism, whatever, by whose ever definition we're using. And in reality, it can be impacting us negatively well before that point. And
Yeah.
so that's like, I think, and I feel the same too, where just watching how many people, and the more that guidelines and research evolve, it's like the less and less drinking. It used to be like 1 drink a day for women and like 2 drinks for men. And now it's like 2 drinks a week. And a lot of people are basing their drinking off of stuff like this and being like, oh, okay, a couple drinks a day, no big deal. And when you think about it, that's impacting us a lot. If anything's integrated into your daily routine, even in moderation, like that's having a big impact on your life and health.
Right. And as women, you look at the dramatic increase in like breast cancer risk for drinking any amount. It's not like your risk goes up if you're drinking 10 drinks a week. It's like every single drink that you consume is increasing your risk
Right.
of breast cancer. And after going through, facing cancer with my husband, like that's not something I'm willing to put my family through again if I have any sense of control over it, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to do something that knowingly increases that risk, but so
Mhm.
few people really know those statistics.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easy to believe what you want to believe too, and find things that reinforce your biases if you're not really ready to change. And so that's also hard. I think our culture is very geared towards immediate gratification and reinforcing that instead of, hey, dig deep and do the work. It's really going to suck. But when you have every other alternative for immediate escape, it's very easy. So, yeah, you have to really choose to kind of dig in, I think, and not everyone wants to do that. And so, yeah, and some people feel perfectly fine with where they're at. And so it is. It's just, I love your take on it all and the way that you approach it too. It feels very aligned to mine.
Oh,
And I
good.
know one thing you talked about too that really stood out to me in the book, and I talk with clients a lot, and I'd say that this is almost like 50% of what we talk about is people being afraid of how changing their relationship to alcohol is gonna affect their relationships. And it's funny because I've been doing sober like sister circles, and at this last one that I did, this topic came up about a bachelorette party, and the girl, she was just an outside perspective of it, but she's sober curious, but kind of like, what do you think about this? And so I wanted to hear what you think too. But basically, they're having a bachelorette party. One of the friends is newly sober, and the rest of the girls are like, we want to have a ratchet drunk bachelorette party. And so they kind of had a hard conversation around that, and the sober person ultimately decided like not to go, newly sober. But it was definitely like a source of contention and kind of like drama. And so what are your thoughts on how we navigate, early sobriety with heavy drinking events? Like, what kind of, as people in friendship with one another, what kind of responsibility do the drinkers have versus like the sober person? What are your thoughts on those sorts of situations? And I know you explained one similar in the book.
Yeah, this kind of thing is so tricky. And when you're newly sober and going through it, I know I personally felt like it was on me. Like I was making a change that was important for me, and my change was not about them, my friends, it was about me. And so it was important that I kind of kept my perspective and wasn't judging them and wasn't and I didn't expect I expected their support, but I did not expect them to change the way we had been operating as friends for decades, right?
Mhm.
To suddenly meet my needs. I don't know. I probably could have expected a little bit more. But early on, I felt like it was my responsibility to protect myself the way I needed to. So if there were events going on, like heavy drinking events that were going on that I didn't feel like I could be a part of, I didn't go. And I know people stress about that, like, oh my gosh, is this going to be the end of my social life? But for me, it was like saying no to some events for a couple of months so that I feel kind of safe and grounded is okay. That is not the rest of my life, right? I'm
Mhm.
not going to have to avoid things forever. Um, the bachelorette party situation is interesting. I think if it had been me, I would have I probably would have also made the decision not to go, but I don't know that I would not have expected or wanted my friends to change
Mhm.
the dynamic of the party to meet me. I would have hoped they would say something like, we will try to plan an event that weekend that's not doesn't revolve around alcohol, or we'll make sure that you have drinks or something like that if you wanted to come. Or um but I probably would have done the same thing. I probably
Yeah.
wouldn't have gone, and I would have insisted that they kind of do their thing.
Hmm.
Um, I think it's going to vary based on your friends, though. I think you have to, if there are people who are going to support you and want to see you happy and successful, you have to kind of practice advocating for yourself and setting boundaries. And so it took me a while to do that. And the one event you mentioned, they were going to, it's a wine bar and restaurant. It's like my favorite spot. And I noticed it on Instagram. It was like Friday night. And I was like, oh, everybody has new stories up. And then I was like, oh my gosh, it's girls' night and they're all at the wine bar and nobody even told me.
Hmm.
And that was the thing where like I would have gone. It's my favorite restaurant. Like, yeah, they serve wine, but they have my favorite steak salad. Why didn't you invite me? I
Yeah.
was really
But
upset.
they also like food.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like it was like a nightclub or
Yeah.
um and so it prompted me to sort of come up with some boundaries, or like, you know, a list of things to communicate with them. Like, please still invite me places, even if I might have to say no for a while, or depending on the situation, I might say no, but please still invite me. Or just little things like if we're going out to dinner, um, I'm not gonna just split the bill because everybody's had like 5 bottles of wine at the table. I'm not gonna split the bill when I just had like a salad and a club soda. Like that's silly, but like it's kind of a,
Yeah.
a big deal. Or
Definitely found myself in that situation where I'm like, okay, I'm spending like $100 more here for your drinks. That doesn't seem fair.
yeah. And I
But
was
like
like,
in
I'm
the
not gonna
moment, yeah,
I'm
you
not
don't
gonna
really.
let myself like silently resent stuff like that. I'm gonna speak up about it.
Yeah.
Or I don't like some can we sometimes do things that don't revolve around alcohol, or but so it prompted me to have some kind of uncomfortable for me conversations to say, okay, this is what I need from you. And they were really receptive to that.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
there's still bumps as you're figuring it out.
Right. And I think it's just like as you evolve so much throughout the process of sobriety and how you feel and grow, it's like this crazy transformational growth period. And yeah, I felt the same way where I was like, I would like to be invited, but I probably won't go maybe for a year. And then,
Yeah.
after that, now it's funny because in the beginning, I think too, there's this like element of, I always say like you're changing, not the other people. So like you do have to be responsible for yourself and your boundaries and putting yourself in environments that you're going to feel most comfortable in. And I feel the same way. Like I probably wouldn't even want to go on a heavy drinking bachelorette party in early sobriety. But I also tell people like, and this is, I thought about this a lot afterwards, obviously, because I was like, what do I think about that? And what
Hmm.
you said is so true, like really evaluating, do you feel genuinely supported by these people? Like outside of this, you don't get to dictate if they want to have their drunken bachelorette party, that's their prerogative. But outside of like this circumstance, do you feel genuinely supported by them, etc., like you said? And also, I think a lot of times when we change, we also need other outlets for like support that reflect the changes we're making. So you're not placing
Yeah.
expectations on this like group of people that's, they have their space in your life, but maybe they're not as supportive of this new chapter and you need more community and support around that. And I found that when I did develop community outside of like my old drinking friends, now when I'm around, groups of people heavily drinking or whatever. I'm like, it's fun. It's kind of entertaining. I'm like, whatever, this isn't my norm.
Exactly.
And I have support elsewhere. And I'm not expecting like support from people who aren't really capable of giving it to me, which I think a lot
Right.
of people do early on.
And it's no fault of their own,
Right.
but how are my friends who drink and have no insight into this like world of sobriety? I can't expect them to give me that. I expect them to love me and kind of have my back and be behind me, but they're not going to be able to give me the same kind of support that
Right.
somebody from the sobriety community can. So I think you're right. It's really important to have that outlet. And then it does make those interactions with your regular friends easier because you're not expecting them to give you something that they're not
Yeah.
really equipped to give.
Yeah, you just know what it is. Like, yeah, they'll probably be drinking when I spend time with you guys, and I get to limit how I do that and what I like hope to gain from it. It wasn't, and in recognizing in early sobriety, you're so much more raw and vulnerable. Like,
Yes.
it's a different reality than like a couple years down the line. So I always try to reinforce people like it's not gonna feel like this forever. Just give yourself grace during this period and like don't force yourself to be in situations that don't feel good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right, let's see here. Okay, before we wrap things up, I wanted to say, to reflect back, you said at one point you never really felt like you fit in, and that kind of like sort of compounded your drinking later on. And so you mentioned feeling like more introverted. Were there any other qualities you feel like that kind of kept you from feeling like you fit in that you think contributed to drinking later that other people might relate to too?
I think it was one, the introversion thing, that was a big part of it. But two, I was also very much a people pleaser. And I know that's something I hear lots of people in this space talking about. And I think that sort of contributed and is something that kind of um, kept me drinking as well. I think those are probably the big ones in terms of kind
Mm.
of my personality traits.
Yeah, people pleasing is huge. I think a lot of people relate to that because it's like you're kind of self-abandoning continuously. And I feel like sobriety has been the biggest opportunity to honor myself in all
Yeah.
sorts of situations, not
Yes.
just like the choice not to drink, but I think making the choice not to drink makes you face all the ways in which you were losing yourself elsewhere as well. And the relationships or the jobs or the circumstances, the life choices, all the ways in which you're not choosing yourself, you're kind of forced to confront that. And so it really shatters people pleasing tendencies.
That is for sure. That is for sure. I almost think it's come across as sort of I've come across as sort of abrasive or I don't know. I think it was a combination of when I quit drinking was also like I was in my early 40s. It was like this perfect combination of like I've reached the point in my life where I don't care what you think, and now I'm sober and I'm not interested in people pleasing and I'm gonna take care of myself. And it was like this whoa, it was sort of a powerful shift.
Yeah, I feel similarly. I was same thing, converging on starting to realize like, hey, I want to live the life I want to live, God damn it.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna make it happen. I'm actually celebrating 4 years today. So I
Oh my gosh,
have
congratulations.
thank
That's
you.
amazing.
I realized I was like, oh, we scheduled this on my 4 year alcohol-free versary. So it's just like really exciting to
That's
celebrate
so
sobriety
fun. Do you
together.
do anything fun to celebrate yourself?
You know what? It's funny, like not really. I did record a solo podcast episode to kind of like reflect on my biggest takeaways so far and how I've learned and grown throughout the process and still learning and growing, you know. But yeah, it's been a wild ride for sure. So much like transformation is such an overused word, but I can't imagine a more profound like shift that I could have made in my life besides maybe becoming a mom. And yeah, I was definitely anticipating like the mental and physical benefits, but I think the spiritual like growth and evolution took me by surprise a little.
I love that. I
Yeah,
love
so
it.
fun. But yeah, tell me, I always love asking this because I think we do collect so much wisdom through our choice not to drink alcohol. And I wanted to hear if you could give your drinking self one piece of advice from your current perspective, what would it be?
The advice that I would give my drinking self would be listen to your intuition. It
Mm,
knows what it's talking about. That voice that keeps telling you that something's not right,
mm,
it's onto something, and listen.
mhm,
That's my one. I mean, I hesitate to call it a regret, but I wish I had the information I needed. I
mhm,
knew, that little voice inside knew what was up for so long. And I just wish I would have listened. So if you feel a nudge telling you that something is not right, at least explore it. It's worth exploring that nudge.
mhm. Yeah, 100%. Follow the nudges. Yeah, alcohol's not going anywhere too. So if you decide you want to go back, you can, but
It'll be
at least
there.
you're leaving no rock unturned in your life. And that is, I think, the key to living life without regrets is just digging into your curiosity and following that voice, like you said. So good. And so tell people where to find you, where they can find your book, any plans on the horizon for anything exciting you want to share.
Yeah. So you can find me on Instagram at Hadley_Sorensen. That's where I kind of spend most of my time online. I also have a website that's just hadleysorensen.com. My book, The Dirty Truth on Social Drinking,
Very relatable.
everything in moderation and other BS, is available on Amazon. Or you can find, a link from my website. I am working on another book,
Woo!
which is different, but it's still in the alcohol space.
Oh my God,
Um,
the suspense. Can you share what's different about it?
it's a novel. It's
Oh,
fiction.
oh, cool.
Um, but it touches on a lot of the same kind of themes. It's just sort of from a different perspective. So I'm
Mhm.
very excited about it. So
That's so fun.
that will be coming down the road.
I love that. Exciting. Congrats on all of your writing. That's so great.
Oh,
And
thank you.
your motherhood and your sobriety. And I really appreciate you sharing your story.
My
And yeah,
pleasure.
get the book, everyone. It was amazing. And until next time, thanks for listening.
Thank you.